Dennis's journey to meeting his son is a lesson for us all that we have to construct new futures for ourselves when our plans don't work out as we have dreamed. In his calming and assuring manner, Dennis encourages us to keep knocking on the doors, believing that the answers we are looking for will soon appear. He is the perfect story to contemplate as we prepare for Thanksgiving. Hello, and welcome to another installment of At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a platform where we will learn from people who come from different walks of life, careers, and experiences, but all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of saying yes to the unexpected turns of their lives, and they are now using the power of their voice, or podium, to make an impact on the world we live in today. At the Podium is the intersection of art, culture, and big thoughts wrapped up in good old-fashioned conversation. Today, I'm thrilled and humbled to share the podium with Dennis Williams. Dennis leads corporate social responsibility for Warner Media. He is responsible for the company's philanthropic strategies, community and external partnerships, volunteer engagements, governance, board placement, and managing key Warner Media CSR initiatives. Prior to Warner Media, Williams was head of CSR at HBO. He joined that company in 1997 in human resources and later worked in affiliate sales and marketing. Williams is an advocate for equality in education and LGBTQ rights and serves on the board for the Fund for Public Schools, Horizons National, and NYC's LGBTQ Community Center. A native of Kansas City, Williams holds a BA in English from Hamline University. Dennis, welcome to At the Podium.
Hey, Patrick Huey. Thanks for having me.
It's so good to see you. Now, Dennis, you and I have been friends for 20 years. And we met. I was doing a show in Milwaukee at the Milwaukee Rep. You were in Madison. Were you studying in Madison or were you teaching in Madison?
No, I was studying at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And I think we would sneak over to Milwaukee to get a little, flavor and texture to the Madison culture.
I think that's where we met and became friends. And over the past 2 decades, we really have, had the joy and luxury of knowing each other through those years. You were actually at my 45th birthday party, which we kind of threw impromptu in Manhattan one year, which was pretty awesome.
No, that's like one of the best things about life is the longevity of friendships. So it's really great to be to continue to be connected.
It really is, and I've so thoroughly enjoyed watching your life grow and expand over the past decade, which is part of the reason why we're talking today. Listen, we could spend an hour talking about your amazing career that you've had at Warner Media and at HBO, but I really wanted to talk to you today about something a little bit more personal, which to me falls under the heading of big thoughts, the big thoughts portion of At the Podium. And it's really your journey through IVF. And I think I wanted to talk to you because surrogacy is really a quiet movement in America, and especially within the Black community, within the Black gay community, and also the single Black gay male community. And so I wanted to talk to you about that journey today because I think there's lessons for us all to learn from what your experience was in that process.
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you for being willing to have the conversation about something other than my career, which is, obviously an important part of my life. But the things that matter most, obviously, are how we take care of ourselves and how we create family. And I think you're right. I mean, this idea of IVF was certainly not something that was at the forefront of my mind. I didn't grow up hearing about people who utilized, assisted reproductive strategies to create their families. And I dare say that may simply have been because if there were people doing it, they weren't talking about it. And that has been the thing that's been most surprising to me, is this idea of secrecy and sort of not telling, and sort of to have seen that so often in the IVF process was just shocking to me, particularly given what we were all attempting to do, which was to bring life into the world. And so I was like, we're working towards this very, very celebratory moment, but we're not telling anyone that we're doing it.
Why the secrecy? I have a dear friend of mine who, in her late 40s, early 50s, was told by her mother, because of medical reasons, that her father was not the father she knew as her father was not her biological father. She was conceived through sperm donation, which should be something that's celebrated, that her life was able to come into the world that way. But again, so much secrecy around this. Why do you think that is?
Sexism, I think is probably the easiest answer, but I mean, it's more complicated than that. But I think for sure, being able to experience this as a man, and being particularly as a gay man, gave me a different perspective and vantage point, right? I was doing this because I wanted to do it, and not coming from a place where society had told me that I was inadequate for not being able to do it on my own. And I think, unfortunately, those are the roots of the secrecy and the shame for assisted reproductive technologies, particularly because it's most often women. And so we live in this sexist patriarchal society that says to women that your primary purpose is to have to sort of bring life into the world, right? And that we define your worth and your value in that way. And so if you are challenged in doing that, you're sort of labeled, less than or inadequate. And so no one wants to walk around kind of with that scarlet letter on their chest if you're a woman, right? And so you don't talk about it. You don't talk about struggles or challenges, which in turn means that you're not creating a community of people who it turns out are a lot of people. I mean, getting pregnant and having a child is not as easy as they make it look on television. It's complicated for a number of people for a number of reasons. And so one, we've not really given women the space to say open and honestly, hey, this is something that I need help and assistance with. So I think that's one. And then I think, secondly, it's this idea of sexuality, right? We don't like talking about our bodies. We don't like talking about our private parts. And so we allow, this kind of puritanical notion of sex and sexuality to prevent us from having these really important conversations.
Yeah, I think you just referenced the Scarlet Letter, which I think a theme that has emerged throughout the different series we've done on this show has been this idea of shame. And I think we've allowed shame to color this conversation, which is a very real conversation for many people, as you alluded to, in this country, in this world, who cannot naturally or easily become pregnant. So thank goodness we have the means, the science, and the technology to help people who would be fantastic parents become those fantastic parents.
Yeah.
And bring life into the world.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy too, Patrick, because, I spent a lot of time as a single man. Sometimes my sister would come with me, which is also weird because then they would just assume that we were a heterosexual couple and treat us differently. But often I was there by myself. And so I was a little bit of like the sociologist in the room, right? I was, paying attention to body language and behaviors of other people around me, and just kind of observing, first of all, just the diversity of people who were sitting in the room, right? This is not limited to white women or Black women or Asian American women, or like every type of person that you can imagine was sitting in that room, right? Which tells me that these challenges are universal, right? But then the other thing that was sort of shocking and surprising for me is it was a bit of a dance routine, right? A very kind of choreographed routine where, they would call you back, you'd go through the door, and sort of wait your turn for them to call you back. And you're sort of on pins and needles, right? Waiting for your turn. But ahead of you, someone has already been called back. And, that on the other side of the door, you're getting either good news or bad news, right? About whatever is happening in that particular checkup. What was startling for me and sometimes really hard to watch was seeing a woman come through the doors after having gone back to speak to the doctor. And you could see sort of visibly like tears in their eyes, like they had not gotten good news. And the physical manifestation of that was so evident. And my impulse, like when you see that, is to like comfort that person, to offer some kind of, condolence or comfort. Like, we're all in this together. So I know that you didn't get good news and I'm really sorry for you. But of course I couldn't do that. I was sort of paralyzed. But seeing that no one else went to do that for her, right? And yet the next person could easily get the exact same news, right? Or so I was like, wait, we're not even talking about it in this room. There's no conversation amongst the people sitting here who are all going through the same thing. It's very siloed and such an individual, lonely experience when, on any given day, you can find yourself being the person coming back through that door with tears in your eyes.
And it can be walking through that door isn't just about IVF. It's about a cancer diagnosis. It's about finding out a loved one has passed away. That we have to open these channels of empathy within ourselves for each other. We were so siloed, as you put it, that we can't even have that human impulse of comforting another person take the lead.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was remarkable. I was like, where is the humanity? Where's the sisterhood? Where's the shared experience that is so needed and necessary in this moment? And then, on the other side of that are the people who come out smiling and just whisk out, because you don't want to share your joy knowing that the next person may not get that kind of news. So it was just a really interesting experience. And again, for me as a man, no one was touching my body. No one was interrogating my medical histories after you kind of do some early work on like sperm count. But, I had the privilege and the benefit of being detached in a way that a lot of those women couldn't be. And that I think gave me space to think about and consider all that was happening around me. But I can only imagine that if I were going back and someone was giving very, very personal information to me or examining me, I wouldn't have had time to necessarily process it in that way.
Okay. I want to back up a little bit, Dennis. I want to understand how your journey began with in vitro fertilization.
Heartbreak. It all begins with love or the absence of. No. I mean, I can certainly laugh about the experience now, but quite simply, I had sort of reached an age where and we talk about this for women, but I think it's also very real for many men, where I felt like the biological clock was ticking. I had sort of exhausted the decade that was my 30s. I'd been for most of my 30s, I'd been in a committed relationship with my previous partner. And I sort of thought that was it, like I found it. We get to ride off into the sunset, fast forward 40 years, there's rocking chairs and grandchildren and Christmas holidays. And then that relationship ended just before my 39th birthday. And I was just thrown into a complete tailspin for a variety of reasons. One, I didn't want the relationship to end. It wasn't my choice to end it. And then secondly, thinking, wait, did I just waste my 30s on someone? And like, how do I start all over again? And so he and I had started the IVF process together. And so that was also this, vision that I had of what my life was going to be looking like in a couple of years. So we started the process together. At a certain point throughout the process, it became evident that the relationship was not going to survive. And so we pressed pause on it. So I'd gotten pretty far down the road in the relationship. And when the relationship ended, I just thought, poof, it disappeared. And now I don't know how I'm going to have kids, and I can't do this on my own, and all those sorts of things. So my advice to everyone when you find yourself in that space is to do what I did, and that is find a very, very, very good therapist. So I'm a huge advocate and proponent of mental health and mental wellness. And I ran to not even just a psychologist, but it was to give you a sense of my state of being. It was the first time that I actually went to see a psychiatrist. I was like, the inability to kind of process the world around me was just overwhelming. And so I found a really fantastic therapist, Dr. Martinez Perez. And through a lot of work, we started examining and going through the rubble of my relationship, and kind of like finding the phoenix of myself out of that. But importantly, Dr. Martinez Perez encouraged me to construct a new future for myself. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about he said this really important thing, which was when you end a significant relationship, you mourn the loss of what you had, right? So for all that time, I had this familiarity, right, with this person, and this, I knew his steps, he knew mine. So you miss that goes away, and all of a sudden, no one's around that knows how you like your coffee, right? But you also have to mourn the loss of the relationship you thought you were going to have, the future that you imagined having with that person. And part of that future for me was being, co-parents, having a family. So when we got to examining that part, he was like, well, wait a minute, you were going down this IVF road. Is that door closed forever? And so this is where, the divine steps into my life. My friend, who is just a very, very generous and brilliant Black woman, Black lesbian, who had offered to be our egg donor, came back into my life and was like, hey, she literally said, you and I have unfinished business. And I was like, what? Do you want me to Zelle, Venmo you? Like, what's the unfinished business? And she said, no, I always believed that I was supposed to donate my eggs to you. I'm not interested in being a parent. I know how important this was for you. And I can't shake this feeling that we didn't finish what we started, right? We were supposed to finish this thing. So on the one hand, I have this like really healthy conversation going on with my therapist. And then outside of the office, I have life presenting itself, that opportunity all over again. And I'm, so grateful that I was in an emotional space and a mental space as a result of the work I was doing in therapy to receive that from her, right? And to not run away from it. So as you can tell, my voice starts cracking because it gets really kind of emotional, just like even going back to that place. So she very, very generously went through a lot of medical stuff. For anyone who's listening to this podcast who's gone through IVF, you know that it takes a lot to do an egg retrieval in terms of a woman's body getting prepared and hyperstimulating ovaries. I mean, I swear I felt like I could be an OBGYN after this was done. Like I knew so much about what was happening. And she went through it all over again for me, which was remarkable, really, really remarkable. Like to say it was a gift is an understatement. And so then I had access to eggs, and I had them frozen, as most people know. Like I pressed pause on that process, but the eggs were there for when I was finished processing the rest of my life, right? That was the conversation I had with my therapist. I was like, I have them. I'm still not ready. I still have some more work I need to do. And then, sort of fast forward, I took a leap of faith and reached out to someone that I knew who had been a surrogate before. And again, she was just remarkable and helped guide me through the process and was like, yeah, let's do this. And so that was in 2000, and my relationship ended in 2010. And I started in earnest the process of implanting the embryo in 2013, that summer. And my son was born in May of 2014.
Wow. So, Dennis, in your journey, you had an identified egg donor, you had an identified surrogate. Is that the normal process in the IVF journey, or is it normally being managed by an agency who's putting together the different pieces for a couple or an individual?
That's such a great question, and I think one that is important to answer. It is often the case that people are using experts and agencies for this, and I don't discourage people from doing that. It's a very complicated process, and so if you can have experts guiding you, I mean, there are doctors, there are lawyers, there are therapists, like there's an entire list of steps and processes that you have to go through. And so if you haven't done that on your own before, it can be quite overwhelming. That is also quite costly. And this is where we get into real life. Like for so many people, if your insurance isn't covering it, and sometimes this is covered for women, more and more, I think people need to be pushing their companies, particularly LGBT people, and people of color, to examine your company's healthcare policy to see whether or not they allow for surrogacy. Sometimes there's what's called a surrogacy exemption, which means your insurance won't cover it, which just makes absolutely no sense to me. And so, these things should be much more affordable than they are, and we have a lot of work, with healthcare and insurance companies to make that so. And I think it's important because the price tag keeps it out of reach for so many people. It is such a very, very expensive process. And so you have people taking out second mortgages on their homes or, going into debt to try to do this if you decide that this is the route that you want to go. So I did not have those kinds of funds available to me. At that time, I think I'd make a decent salary, but I certainly wasn't trying to spend it all on this process. And so it was so remarkable to me that someone came into my life and said, I'll donate my eggs, right? And I didn't have to use an agency to help find and identify that person, which is what I was going to do. When I was in that previous relationship in a 2-income household, we were totally using the agency. But on my own as a single man, I wasn't able to think about my resources in that way. And so, not having to have an agency identify the egg donor was great. And then that I was able to identify my own surrogate. And for me, I was just like, well, wait a minute, I have the eggs. That's a lot of the process. What if I could find my own surrogate? I'm also, as you know, Patrick, I'm a Virgo and I like project managing, and I like, I like these kinds of challenges. And so the Virgo in me kind of was like, here's a challenge, and if you keep knocking on enough doors, you'll find the answer to it. And as I said, I literally sat and thought, there are all of these people around me who have used who've gone through this process and who have been able to work with some remarkable women who have stepped up to be surrogates. I wonder if any of them would introduce me to one of theirs. And I'd read that often it is the case that if someone is a surrogate once you get over that initial reaction of like, wait a minute, how do I do this? That because it's such a very generous thing to do is to like offer to carry someone's child inside of you. I can't even describe the feeling that I have when I'm in the room with other surrogates, knowing what they've done, the act of kindness and generosity for another person or another family. So I read that it's often the case that people are not just surrogates once, that they will do it multiple times. And I was like, well, I just need to find someone who's done it, who's willing to do it again. And it seems like the odds are in my favor. And so I reached out to a wonderful woman who had been a surrogate for a friend of mine who lives in France, which is also interesting. So, and outside the US and like Europe, France in particular, surrogacy is not legal. And so if you are, there are these things called compassionate surrogacy where you can care for a sister or a family member. But what we're doing here now in terms of LGBTQ plus folks going to an agency is not legal in other countries. And in fact, until a year or so ago, surrogacy in this way wasn't even legal in the state of New York. And you can go back and research all of this, but it's a very complicated thing. So my friend had come to the U.S. from France and had had worked with this woman, Angela, and introduced me to Angela. I'm from Kansas. She's from Kansas. We just started connecting and vibing. And then decided that we would go down the journey together.
Is the surrogacy process democratic in terms of race, gender? Or did you have to fight battles that we both fight in our lives in the surrogacy space as well?
It's interesting. I think the biggest hurdle, quite honestly, is for me to get over was initially the economics of it, right? And I think we know that poverty is racist, right? I couldn't marshal a family member to loan me the money or parents. And I know people who have those resources in their lives. And that's a function of just, how inequitable our systems can be here. On the surrogacy side, Angela specifically wanted to work with gay men. And there's a lot of complicated thoughts and emotions, here. There are some women who want to do this for other women, and that's a beautiful and wonderful act of sisterhood. And then there are other people who say, I know that there are a group of people that that fewer people are going to want to do this for, right? It seems weird to them. Like, why would I have a child and give it to a guy? Why would I have a child and give it to a single guy, right? And so for her, that was really exciting. My friend from France is also a single dad. And so the agency had connected them, and she remembered thinking, who's going to choose the single guy from France? And so she did. That's what generosity looks like. And so when he emailed her again, I was like, turns out there's another single guy who lives in New York. She was like, I'd be happy to meet him. And she wasn't actually thinking that she was going to do it again. She was actually going to give me some advice. And as we sort of connected and vibed and realized that we had a lot in common, and that I used to joke with her, I was like, Angela, if you and I happened to sit down next to each other at the bar, we'd be fast friends by the end of the night. Absent this entire process, we just get along, which was really cool. So I didn't have the same kinds of people not wanting to work with me because of race necessarily, because some of that is really blind in the process, but more getting people over the hurdle that as a single man, you can also nurture and care for and raise a child. And that I continue to come up against that when I'm out with my son by myself, or, people just being shocked and surprised that men raise children, and in particular, that Black men raise children.
Why did you choose IVF as opposed to adoption?
So that's where all my insecurities and fear and not being chosen triggers come from. So in the adoption world, and I had friends who have adopted, and friends who at the time were going through the adoption process. The adoption process just seemed really daunting to me because I was watching couples, by and large, and remember, I was not coupled, but I was watching couples put together adoption books. And those were these documents where they would present themselves to prospective folks who were trying to find homes for the children, pregnant women. And, these books they're like the high gloss brochure that you see when you're selling a home. It's like, hi, we're Biff and Bob, and he's an accountant, And I'm a lawyer, and we have a home in New York and a house in Connecticut, and we spend our summers in Europe. And it just was like on it, like all of these, all of these different characteristics and, the accoutrement and the trappings of their lives to kind of sell themselves to a potential match. And I thought, okay, if I'm that person and I open the book and you got Biff and Bob with the house in Connecticut and all the money in the bank and the swimming pool and the fancy vacations, and not that I don't have some of those things, I get to travel a little bit too, but relatively speaking, who's going to choose the single Black gay guy to give their kid to? And I just didn't think that I was going to shake out very well in that process. I was like, I'm going to be, once again, the last one chosen for the team. And I don't want to, at 39, I don't want to spend years and years in the adoption queue waiting for someone to choose me.
Wow, that really, really hit home. I want to ask you, there's so many questions I want to ask you. Legally speaking, is this process of IVF governed by the federal law or by state law?
Oh my gosh, Patrick, I love that question. It's state by state. And it's so, as is so many of the protections that we all really need to be codified at the federal level, right? So there are some states, each state sets a different set of criteria for, a number of things. When someone can, for example, terminate their parental rights, right? So in the state of Kansas, where my son was born, I needed Angela to acknowledge legally that he was not her biological child. But by virtue of the fact that she gave birth to him, she and her husband actually have a legal claim to the child, even though he's not biologically theirs. And it's a mismatch between where technology is and laws that have not caught up to technology. So, on face value, and obviously she and I understood this, it's not her child. She has been a vessel. She's been a keeper. She has held and nurtured and helped that child come into existence. But biologically, the kid doesn't belong to her. The kid belongs to me. And so there's a lot of legal work that you do in advance of the delivery to try to move a lot of the bureaucracy around that. And that varies from state to state. So I don't remember all of the laws now, but there are reasons why, for example, people will go to like Ohio or Texas, in my case, Kansas, where they feel like the laws are more favorable towards the intended parent, right? And that would be me, the intended parent. And it's interesting, again, another group of people that don't talk about surrogacy a lot are celebrities, and I won't name names, but there are a number of celebrities who have children via IVF. And you'll see that they're either doing, California is incredibly progressive, but if you're not doing it in like California, you'll see these celebrities having children born not in their home states. So the laws, in fact, should be examined and looked at so that we get these federal protections. But I would say the same for a lot of LGBT legislation, like hate crimes, et cetera. Like it shouldn't matter when you cross a state line. Your rights shouldn't mutate when you cross those lines. And so, yeah, I ended up, the laws around adoption are a lot more concrete and defined because people have been adopting for a long time. So in a really weird legal process, my son was born, and then in the state of Kansas, I was able 14 days later to officially adopt him. And so if, at some point when he looks at his all of his documentation around his birth, he'll say, wait a minute, my dad adopted me 14 days after I was born. But that was essentially to get a birth certificate that just had my name on it as his parent and not the birth mother, not the egg donor, but to a legal document that clearly defined what my relationship was to him and the absence of his relationship to a lot of other people in that process.
Your son is 7 now. how do you, or do you yet, talk to him about his creation, his origin story? Or is he too young at this point?
No, I don't think we're ever too young to learn about ourselves. I mean, it's not this is not a one and done conversation. You plant little seeds all along. And one of the other things, and I talked about the therapist that I saw for myself, but I also saw a psychologist who specialized in sort of, third party family creations. I can't remember what her exact title was, but she was someone who for years has counseled parents who were adopting children, parents who are adopting children internationally. Like, this space has evolved and grown over time. And now her practice is, she's talking to people who are going through the IVF process. What's interesting of that question about race, right? So she's been at the time that I saw her, she'd been doing this for decades. And when I was sitting in her office, she said to me, over the years, I've seen a lot of people sit, where you're sitting. I've seen it change from, heterosexual couples. And then I saw lesbian couples, and then I saw gay couples, and I saw interracial couples, and I saw single women. You are the very first single Black man that I've seen sit in this chair. And I thought, wow, I mean, this was in the early 2000s. She was like, never have I had this conversation with, someone in your circumstance. And we spent a lot of time, this won't surprise you because you know me, but we spent time talking about what it means in the Black community in particular to not be able to identify a mother, right? That was really important for me to process. Like, how do I raise a child in this community who will walk into an environment and people will say, well, everyone knows their mother. And my kids say, well, my story is different. My story is I was raised by my dad, or my story is that I have an Auntie Angela who was my surrogate, and I have an Auntie Aisha who was my egg donor, right? Like, how do we start to tell that story to him immediately so that it's never a surprise for him? I mean, James Baldwin, I'm going to paraphrase, but Baldwin talks about your deepest secret being your enemy's greatest weapon against you, whether they know the secret or not, right? I don't want my kid to walk around not knowing who he is and having people use that or against him in any way. So very early on, the very first Mother's Day, you have to figure it out. Like, what are you telling your kid about Mother's Day? What are you doing to surround him with, I'm fortunate that I come from a very close family. I was really intentional, for example, about my mom being in the delivery room with me, because I want that to be part of his narrative. From the very beginning, there are all of these people in your life. Very, very intentional about that. All of these people, all these brilliant women who provide whatever kind of nurturing you feel you need from a female source, from a maternal source that I may not necessarily be able to give to you. And I don't know what that is. He gets to define that. I know he loves his Auntie Judy. I know he loves his Auntie Rai Rai. He's, if there's a such thing as a mama's boy, I'm it. But I think I've been replaced in my mother's affection by my son. So, we are all very, and I talk to my family about it too. We don't tiptoe around it, and until COVID, Angela, my surrogate, who's Auntie Angela, had never missed a birthday party. She'd come to every single one of his birthday parties. And when we find ourselves in Washington, D.C., I make a point for him to spend time with Aisha and her partner, so that he has that. All of these relationships may not be the same as other people in his life, but the love is there. There's no absence of love and support for him.
In a really real way, you embody the concept of it takes a village to not only raise a child, but to create a child. Where did this very expansive thinking about parenthood and how one becomes a parent come from within you? Did you grow up like that? Did your mother instill that in you? Where did that way of thinking about how you exist as a parent, as a human being in the world come from?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talk about I talked about with the therapist around childhood development is your personal narrative. And that's what she had me focus on. She's like, you give a narrative, parents give, or caregivers give a narrative to children. And it starts very, very early, right? You tell them they're smart, you tell them they're beautiful, you tell them they are really good at math, and you start to absorb that. And a parent can completely disrupt what you think your narrative is. You may say, I want to go into the arts. And your parent may say, or your caregiver may say to you, no, that's not a viable career. You're going to have to go into science or whatever it is, right? These adults get to shape our lives. And if you have a healthy narrative, or even if you have an unhealthy narrative, oftentimes you return to whatever it is that people have said about you, right? So the example I always give is if you're like, hey, we come from a long line of doctors in our family. Chances are that kid's going to at least look at pre-med at some point in their lives. So that's sort of professionally, but emotionally, we do the same thing. My family is incredibly diverse. We have lots of play cousins and adopted cousins and pretend sisters. And, I sometimes have a difficult time distinguishing between my mom's best friends, who are my aunts, and my mom's sisters, who are my aunts. And so this idea of family for me has always been incredibly fluid, but family has always been really important. And so one of the things I remember when I came out to my mother in, my late teens, she did not take it well. But one of the things that stayed with me was she was just in this very, very agitated, upset state. And she was like, you're going to rob me of grandchildren. And this was, many, many years ago. And I was 19 or 20 or something. I was like, what is she even talking about? I'm not even thinking about having kids. What I didn't realize is that she'd already planted that narrative in my head as I got older, in my late 20s and 30s. I was like, hey, it's time to settle down and have those kids, right? I was returning to the narrative that I had grown up with. So I think that seed had been planted early and came to fruition. But as a gay man, obviously, I had to think outside the box. And I think that is sometimes, it's the silver lining. The silver lining for me was that I so much of my life has been lived outside of conventional boundaries and lines, and they've been. I've had the ability to redraw the boxes that I want for myself, as opposed to the ones that people have told me I'm supposed to be in. So I'm like, no. This is actually the box that I've drawn for myself. This is where I live, not that box over there. And so it was easy for me to, if I look around and I see something, not to think about it in this sort of traditional way. And I'll say this, I've had this conversation with lots of my heterosexual female friends, and I talk to them about the boxes that have been drawn for them around family creation. The box is that good girls don't, right? So we already start putting a box around people's exploration of their sexuality. And then the next box is, well, after you finish this. And then the next box is when you meet him. And then the next box is, and then the next box. And so it is the case in my life that I have a number of women who I've spoken with now, who are, where I was in their late 30s, early 40s, and it hasn't happened for them. And it's unfortunate because they've lived the last several decades according to the boxes of what and how they're supposed to create their families. Because if you step outside of that box and you say, hey, I'm a single woman and I'm ready to have a family and I'm going to go do it, people are like, oh my God, you're a single mother. As if that's some horrible, bad thing, because it's outside the box of, boy meets girl. See Dick, see Jane, see their kids. They live in a house with a white picket fence. And so I encourage not just my my LGBTQ plus friends, but especially my heterosexual female friends. And now I literally 2 weeks ago had a conversation with a heterosexual guy who was like, hey, tell me about this kid of yours, because he's not in a relationship and he's not sure that he wants to wait to be in a relationship. And I'm like, oh my God, you're in a box too. Get out of the box. You can do this. So, for me, that's really that's super important for me, is for people to think about how they plan their families in ways that make sense for them and their lives, and not according to someone else's blueprint or diagram or really, really constrictive box.
I mean, we have really got to break open those boxes and create new ones, or not have them at all. How about that?
Yeah.
What was it like when you met your son? There was such a journey to have him arrive on the planet. What was that moment like? Do you remember when you held him for the first time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's lots of video of me crying, for sure. It was everything I imagined, and then nothing like I imagined at all, right? In that you do what's called a birthing plan, particularly when the circumstances are not the usual for these hospitals or for these birthing centers. So, Angela and I discussed the fact, for example, that you see this in the movie: the child is born, they clean the child up, and then they hand the child to the mother, to the woman. Not always, depending on the circumstances. But for us, that wasn't going to be part of the choreography. She was like, nope, I don't want to be the first person to hold this child. The child is yours. And so we have to rewrite that. Like, again, tear down the box, right? And so that gave me the freedom to say, here's what my birth plan looks like. And this, I mentioned that I'd asked my mom to be there. This is where the video of me crying comes in for you podcast listeners. But I'd asked my mom to be there for a particular reason, because I wanted her to be the very first person to hold my son. And at that point, I knew it was going to be my son. And so I had instructed the doctors and nurses that after he was ready and prepared, to hand him to her first. And my mother's a very spiritual person. I grew up in a very religious household. And so I wanted him to really be welcomed into the tribe of our family, right? Into the village that is our family. So I said to my mother, here's how this is going to go down. They're going to hand you the baby, and you're going to welcome him to our family. And you're going to bless him, and you're going to ask God's blessing on his life. And I'm going to be thankful for the gifts that I've been charged with. So they handed Elon to my mother, and she prayed and blessed him and thanked God for him. And then they handed him to me. But in the meantime, I thought okay, this is going to be very Hakuna Matata, Simba, trumpets, etc. What I wasn't really prepared for was what Angela, my surrogate, had just done, right? I knew what she was going to do, but watching her do it, Patrick, and thinking, she's doing this not for herself. She's doing this for me. I don't think, there are few things in my life that people have ever given to me that I don't think I can repay. I'm like, okay, you give me this thing, then the next time you cover dinner, I'll cover dinner next time. You get this round, I'll get the next round, right? That there's this quid pro quo thing around receiving in my life. And I knew in this moment, watching her go through that there's absolutely no way that I could repay this woman for all she had just gone through, to instruct people to hand me my son. And that was, that meant that, while my mother was praying, I was hugging Angela and crying and thanking her, for all that she had done, not just the 9 months or the 37 and a half weeks to be exact, that she had carried my son. But all she had gone through, to make that experience real and possible for me. See, I told you I can't get through this without the tears, which is a good thing. It's good to always be reminded of how many people, how the village really stood up for me, and continues to stand up for me. Just some incredibly remarkable women in my life who saw that, when you talk about people seeing in you what you don't always see in yourself, at every step of the way, there were these women who were saying, "You're going to be a great father. I want to help. I want to help make that possible for you."
I have a final question for you. What does fatherhood mean to you?
It means so many things. But what surprises me is how much I think about the future. And I think this is the case for a lot of parents. I don't think about my future. I think about his future. I spend so much time. I interpret news stories and climate change and technology. And I always think, like, what's it going to be like for him, right? And what role do I have in ensuring that whatever faces him in the future, he's equipped with the tools and the resources and the ability to navigate and manage those circumstances. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about, how he pays for college. So a conversation on the news about the cost of college tuition and debt is not about me anymore. It's not about my student loans. It's about whether or not it's going to be crippling for him and his generations after, or like all of those things. It's to move out of a selfless space, a selfish space, and out into a selfless space, right? To recenter my thinking around another human being is a wonderful thing that I hope. And you don't have to be a parent to experience that. You just got to find someone whose life matters so much to you that you're willing to make sacrifices and changes in your life for their life to be better. And that can be called fatherhood. That can be called parenthood. That can be called big brother, big sister. That can be big auntie, like however you define it. But it's just recentering your existence so that you're not always at the center of it.
Dennis, thank you so much for your time today and your availability to share your story with us and share your wisdom. I know a lot of people are on this journey that we know of and that we don't know of. So your words will be very helpful to them. I'm beyond grateful to you. And to those of you watching and listening, remember, we all have a voice. Use yours wisely.